At 6:42 a.m. on August 17, 1943, the air at Doadura Airfield, New Guinea, was thick with humidity and tension. The war had turned the once lush green island into a scarred outpost, a place where every sunrise brought a question no one dared say out loud. Who wouldn't make it back today? Under the left wing of a Lockheed P-38 Lightning crouched Technical Sergeant Daniel Foster, a 26-year-old aircraft mechanic who had been living on adrenaline, sweat, and aviation fuel for the better part of a year. He wasn't a pilot. He wasn't supposed to be a hero. But on that morning, without firing a single shot, Foster would do something that changed how every P-38 in the Pacific Theater would fly, and how hundreds of pilots would live. In front of him stood Lieutenant Alex Stone, just 23 years old, a farm kid from Iowa with a calm smile that masked the fatigue behind his eyes. He had flown 6 combat missions so far. 0 kills, and if the numbers meant anything, today might have been his last. Because this morning, Stone wasn't flying into clear skies. He was flying into 18 Japanese Mitsubishi A6M-0 fighters, light, agile, and flown by veterans who had been fighting since Pearl Harbor. The kind of pilots who didn't just shoot to kill. They hunted, studied, and anticipated their prey. Foster knew the P-38 better than anyone in the squadron. He had been maintaining them for 8 long months. Enough time to know every vibration, every rattle, every whisper the aircraft made before takeoff. The P-38 was a masterpiece of engineering. Twin-engine, twin-boom design. Fast, powerful, and absolutely deadly, at least on paper. At high altitude, it was unmatched. At 400 miles per hour, it was a bullet with wings. But there was one problem. One flaw so subtle that it wasn't in the manuals, wasn't in the training, and wasn't even supposed to matter. The P-38 couldn't turn with a 0. It wasn't about bravery or skill. It was physics. The Japanese 0 was lighter, more aerodynamic, and could execute a full horizontal turn in half the time of a P-38. That difference, a few seconds of roll delay, meant everything in a dogfight. It meant that, by the time a P-38 pilot tried to follow a 0 into a turn, the 0 had already cut inside his circle, aimed, and fired. In combat, that half-second wasn't just time. It was life or death. American fighter doctrine was clear. Never turn with a 0. Use your speed. Use altitude. Dive in, shoot, climb out. Hit and run. Don't engage in turning fights. It was simple, logical, textbook perfect. But the sky isn't a classroom. And Lieutenant Stone had tried that doctrine 5 times. 5 times it hadn't worked. The Japanese pilots weren't just skilled. They were intelligent hunters. They baited Americans into turns, faked climbs, farced overshoots, and punished hesitation. They knew American doctrine better than some American pilots did. In just 6 weeks, the 5th Air Force had lost 37 P-38s over New Guinea. Most were shot down in the same way, caught in turning fights they couldn't escape from. Foster had watched too many of those men die. Pilots he'd joked with hours earlier, names that vanished from the roster before dinner. They came back in pieces or not at all. The official reports said it was pilot error, but Foster knew that was a lie. The problem wasn't in the cockpit. It was under his hands, in the control cables. Inside every P-38 ran a network of control cables, steel cords that linked the pilot's control stick to the aircraft's ailerons and elevators. The system was mechanical, precise, but not perfect. In the Lightning's twin-boom design, those cables ran long distances through pulleys and guides, all the way to the tail and back to the wings. That meant slack,
Not much, maybe 3/8 of an inch at full deflection. A small, almost invisible looseness. But to a man like Foster, who spent his life tuning mechanical systems to perfection, that almost nothing was everything. That slack created a delay, a momentary gap between the pilot's movement and the aileron's response. At cruising speed, you'd never notice it. But at low speed, in a high G turn, that fraction of a second meant the plane wasn't turning now. It was turning too late. That gap, that barely measurable delay, was killing pilots. Foster had mentioned it to the engineering officer 2 months earlier. The officer barely looked up from his clipboard. "Cable tensions within factory specifications," he said.
"Changing it would void the aircraft's warranty. You don't touch that, Sergeant. Factory specifications, warranty. As if regulations could stop bullets." That morning, Foster watched Lieutenant Stone walk toward the aircraft, helmet under his arm, sunlight glinting off his goggles. It was supposed to be routine, another mission, another risk, another name that might not come back. But Foster wasn't ready to lose him. Not again. He'd seen too many good men die because of that tiny bit of slack. He'd heard their radios cut off mid-sentence. He'd smelled the smoke of their crashes through the jungle canopy. So he made a decision, not as a soldier following orders, but as a mechanic who knew what was right. Foster walked to his tool chest, pulled out a 6-inch piece of piano wire salvaged from a wrecked Lightning, and bent it carefully into a Z shape. The metal was strong, springy, perfect for what he needed. In 8 quiet minutes, Foster did what no manual permitted. He installed the wire as a tensioner on Stone's left aileron control cable. It added less than half a pound of tension, but it changed everything. No more slack, no more delay. The control system was now alive. He didn't tell anyone. He couldn't. If discovered, it would mean a court-martial, dishonorable discharge, maybe even prison. But if he didn't do it, Stone would die, like the others. When Stone climbed into the cockpit and started his engines, the vibration shook the ground under Foster's boots. He stepped back and watched, heart hammering, as the twin Allison engines roared to life. The P-38 rolled down the runway, lifted gracefully, and disappeared into the morning haze. Foster stood there long after it vanished, hands still greasy, eyes locked on the empty sky. He didn't know it yet, but the next 17 minutes would change everything about how the P-38 Lightning fought, and how the men who flew them survived. The sun was just beginning to climb above the jagged mountains of New Guinea. Its light cut through the mist in golden beams, illuminating rows of steel and aluminum, the American fighter line. Each aircraft sat like a coiled predator, engines ticking as mechanics fueled, loaded, and checked every inch of their machines. But for Technical Sergeant Daniel Foster, this morning felt different. He wasn't just watching another pilot take off. He was watching a test, a dangerous, forbidden experiment hidden inside a $97,000 warplane. Lieutenant Alex Stone had no idea what Foster had done to his aircraft. All he knew was that this might be the mission that killed him, or finally gave him a fighting chance. His orders were clear. Intercept enemy aircraft near the Huon Gulf, roughly 40 miles northwest of Doadura. Intel reported a group of Japanese fighters sweeping toward Allied supply convoys. 18 Zeros. Fast, ruthless, experienced. At 7:42 a.m., the flight of 4 P-38 Lightnings thundered down the runway. Foster stood at the edge of the tarmac, sweat running down his neck, his stomach twisting in knots. He watched the aircraft lift into the air, climb sharply, and form up into a perfect diamond formation against the rising sun. And then they were gone, silver streaks vanishing into a sky that smelled of fuel, metal, and war. At 8:14 a.m., radar and radio operators at Doadura picked up the first transmissions. Static, then a crackle of voices, hurried,
breathless, tense. Bandits, 9 o'clock high, 9 of them, diving fast. Stone and his element were at 13,000 feet, cruising toward the Gulf when they spotted the first dots on the horizon, tiny, dark, and growing larger with every passing second. They weren't alone. 9 Mitsubishi A6M0s, flown by hardened veterans from the 11th Air Fleet, were closing in from above. The Japanese formation split immediately, half diving head-on, the others circling wide to attack from behind. The American lead pilot, Captain George Miller, gave the order. Break formation, go hunting. The sky erupted. Stone pushed the throttles forward. The twin Allison engines screamed as the P-38 surged ahead. He spotted a lone Zero below, slightly separated from its group. A perfect target. He nosed down, the Lightning diving from altitude, wind howling across the canopy. His speed built fast, 320, 350, 380 miles per hour. The Zero grew larger in his gun sight. Stone could see the red Hinamaru, the Japanese rising sun, painted on its fuselage. He lined up, squeezed the trigger. 4.50 caliber machine guns and 120mm cannon roared to life. Tracers tore through the morning air, streaks of fire across the sky. A few hit, flashes of metal shearing off the Zero's wing, but not enough. The Japanese pilot reacted instantly, snap rolling right, diving hard. Stone followed. And that's when it happened. For the first time in his life, the P-38 responded instantly. No lag, no delay. The stick moved, and the wings rolled now. Stone felt it immediately, a living, breathing precision. It wasn't sluggish. It wasn't heavy. It was alive. He rolled 90 degrees in half the normal time, pulled hard into the turn, and lined up again. The Zero was right in his sights. He fired a 3-second burst. Rounds tore through the enemy's fuselage, cockpit, fuel tank, engine. The Zero exploded mid-roll, shattering into pieces that fell toward the jungle below in a burning spiral. One down. Stone barely had time to breathe. His wingman screamed over the radio. 2 more on you, coming down from 12 o'clock. He looked up. 3 Zeros were diving fast, sunlight flashing off their wings like blades. They'd seen him kill one of their own, and now they wanted revenge. Stone jammed the throttles forward again. The Allison engines howled. He started to climb, instinct, doctrine, but halfway through the maneuver, he stopped himself. Doctrine said, run. But doctrine got you killed. He slammed the stick left, rolled hard, and dove into them. The P-38 snapped into the turn, so fast the G-forces slammed him into his seat. The airplane was no longer the lumbering machine he'd fought before. It was sharper, faster. Every movement instant, precise, electric. The lead Zero tried to follow his roll, but couldn't match it. Stone leveled out beneath it, pulled the nose up, and fired. The burst ripped through the Zero's left wing root. The wing folded back, tearing clean off. The aircraft tumbled out of control and vanished into smoke. 2 down. The remaining Zeros split. 1 high, 1 low. They tried to scissor, reversing turns to force Stone into an overshoot. It was the oldest trick in the book. And it always worked against P-38s. But not today. Every time the Zeros reversed, Stone's Lightning mirrored them. Fast, fluid, perfect. The cable tensioner, that hidden piece of piano wire, had erased the lag that had doomed dozens of pilots. Stone stayed tight in the fight. The Zero below bled too much speed in a reversal. An instant mistake, but enough. Stone rolled inside the turn, closed the distance to 200 feet, and fired. The 20mm shells walked up the Japanese fighter's fuselage and detonated in the cockpit. The aircraft disintegrated in midair, pieces striking Stone's right boom as he flew through the debris cloud. 3 kills, 17 minutes of chaos, and silence. At 9:03 a.m., a lone P-38 broke through the mist above Doadura and lined up for landing. The engines sputtered from fuel loss. Bullet holes scarred the fuselage, but it was flying. Foster watched from the flight line as it touched down, bounced once, and rolled to a stop. When Stone climbed out of the cockpit, his face was pale, drenched in sweat, his hands trembling. He took off his helmet, walked straight toward Foster, and said just 2 words. It worked. Foster didn't reply. He just nodded, trying to hide the relief washing through him. He had gambled everything, his career, his freedom, on a 6-inch piece of wire, and he had just changed the war. What neither of them knew was that 6 other pilots had seen the entire engagement from altitude. Captain George Miller, the flight leader, watched in disbelief. From his vantage point, it looked like Stone's Lightning was rolling twice as fast as any P-38 he'd ever seen. When they landed, Miller went straight to Stone during the debriefing. "What the hell did you do up there?" Stone, still shaking, said, "It wasn't me. Ask Foster." Within hours, Miller found the mechanic. Oil-stained coveralls, eyes tired, hands trembling from too much coffee and too little sleep. Foster told him the truth. The piano wire, the tensioner, the slack he'd removed, the regulation he'd broken. Miller didn't hesitate. "Can you do it to mine?" That night, in the dim light of a maintenance tent, Foster modified Miller's aircraft. The same 8-minute procedure, the same silent prayer that it wouldn't get them both court-martialed. The next morning, Miller flew his mission. When he returned, he called it the first time a P-38 ever felt like a fighter, not a truck. By August 20th, Foster had modified 9 aircraft. Pilots whispered about it in the ready rooms. Mechanics shared sketches on scraps of paper. Some were too afraid to try it. Others didn't care about the rules anymore. They wanted to live, and they started to win. The morning after Miller's flight, whispers began to move through the base like smoke. Pilots who'd once cursed the Lightning's stiffness were now curious, even desperate. Something was changing. A rumor was spreading that someone had fixed the P-38. No one said it out loud. Not in front of officers, not during debriefings, but in the canteen, in the hangars, in the silence between missions. It was all anyone could talk about. Stone downed 3 zeros yesterday, alone. He says the plane turned like a Spitfire. Someone's been messing with the controls. For months, the Pacific squadrons had fought at a disadvantage. The P-38 was fast, yes. It could outrun anything in level flight. But in close combat, against the nimble Japanese Zero, it was like a heavyweight boxer trying to hit a mosquito. The Lightning rolled slowly, stiffly. In dogfights, seconds meant survival, and the P-38 was always 1 second too late. Until now. Technical Sergeant Daniel Foster became a ghost, a mechanic known only by rumor and legend. He avoided attention, rarely slept, and worked in silence. Each night, he would find one aircraft, one pilot willing to take the risk. The same procedure every time. Remove the inspection plate, tighten the cable pulleys, install a small steel spring to maintain tension. 8 minutes. That was all it took. He didn't tell his superiors. He didn't ask for permission, because permission would have killed the idea. By late August 1943, 21 P-38s in the 5th Air Force carried Foster's secret. And the results were staggering. Kill ratios flipped overnight. In early July, for every Japanese plane shot down, the Americans lost nearly 2. By September, the numbers reversed. 2.3 kills for every loss. No new engines, no new weapons, just control. A few turns of a wrench had changed everything. On the other side of the Pacific, Japanese intelligence officers began to take notice. Intercepted radio chatter revealed American pilots bragging about new tricks. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who had fought the P-38s for months, wrote later that something had shifted. They turned differently. They rolled with a quickness we had never seen. The P-38 was no longer predictable. Pilots who had once mocked the Lightning began to fear it. In one engagement over Wewak, a formation of Zeros attempted their classic climbing spiral, a maneuver that usually baited Americans into a stall. But the Lightnings matched the move, rolled tighter, and counterattacked with terrifying precision. 3 Zeros were destroyed in less than 90 seconds. The rest fled. To the Japanese, it seemed the Americans had introduced a new variant of the aircraft, a secret model unknown to intelligence. They called it the Lightning Kai, Kai meaning improved. But there was no new variant, just one mechanic's illegal modification, copied, refined, and passed from base to base, squadron to squadron, island to island. By late September, Foster's method reached Doadura, Nadzab, and Finschhafen. Mechanics began writing coded messages in maintenance logs. Cable trim test completed. Pilot satisfied with roll response. Adjustment within field tolerance. These were the phrases that hid the truth in plain sight. No one outside the hangars understood what they meant, but every pilot who saw those notes smiled quietly. They knew. Colonel Charles MacDonald, commanding officer of the 475th Fighter Group, noticed the rising success rate. He demanded an explanation. His intelligence officers couldn't find one. Engine performance was unchanged, fuel load the same, weather consistent. Something was happening mechanically, but no one would admit it. MacDonald ordered inspections and found nothing, because Foster had been careful. Every altered aircraft was restored to spec before inspection, then retightened afterward. The perfect crime against bureaucracy, invisible and life-saving. By October 1943, combat reports began describing things that had never been seen before. Lightning pilots out-turning Zeros, performing split S reversals at low altitude, executing snap rolls that left their pursuers spinning out of control. The Japanese command dismissed it as exaggeration. They assumed the Americans were lying for propaganda. But intelligence photographs told another story. Wrecks of Zeros riddled with cannon holes, shot from angles that shouldn't have been possible. At the same time, U.S. Army Air Force headquarters in Brisbane began analyzing gun camera footage. One film, taken from Lieutenant Stone's P-38, showed a sequence that stunned analysts. He had executed 4 full-barrel rolls in a chase, rolls that the P-38's design supposedly couldn't perform. The footage was sent up the chain of command, all the way to General George C. Kenny, commander of Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific. Kenny was skeptical. He ordered the aircraft flown to a test field near Townsville for evaluation. 3 days later, his test pilots returned with reports that stunned him. The Lightning handles differently, sharper, tighter, almost no control delay. Someone's changed something, and it works. Kenny called it a field miracle, but he also knew what that meant. Someone had broken orders and saved lives. By November 1943, every squadron in the 5th Air Force knew the secret, though no official document mentioned it. Mechanics passed it down through handshakes and whispers, from veteran to rookie, from base to base. Foster never received credit. He didn't want it. He just kept working, quietly, while new aircraft arrived, all unknowingly awaiting his touch. Every pilot who flew his modified planes noticed it within seconds of takeoff. The roll rate felt alive, precise. You could see it in their faces when they landed. The same stunned disbelief Stone had shown that first morning. It wasn't joy, It was something deeper, the realization that survival had become possible. By December 1943, American pilots began turning the tide across the Pacific. At Rabaul, Wewak, New Britain, they dominated the air. The P-38, once a clumsy giant, now tore through enemy formations like lightning-made flesh. Kill ratios climbed again, 3.7 to 1 by year's end. For the first time in the war, Japanese Fighter Command began running out of experienced pilots. Every mission meant fewer returning aces, fewer men to train the next generation. The Lightning, once mocked by its own pilots, had become the undisputed king of the Pacific skies, not because of an upgrade from Lockheed, not because of a new model from the States, but because one man refused to follow the book. By early October 1943, the skies over New Guinea were quieter than they had been in months. For the first time, American pilots in P-38s were returning home alive, and in increasing numbers. Squadron debriefs that once sounded like casualty reports now carried something new: hope. But at headquarters, hope often came with suspicion. Something in the maintenance records didn't add up.
Captain George Miller's aircraft, the one with the impossible roll rate,
had logged 3 separate control cable inspections that month. Each report showed slightly different tension readings. Too small to notice in flight, but enough to raise a red flag for the engineering officer. When Second Lieutenant Raymond Carter, a by-the-book inspector sent from 5th Air Force Command, ran his standard post-flight checks, he noticed the numbers didn't line up. Cable tension on Stone's and Miller's aircraft was higher than factory spec. When he asked why, every crew chief gave the same vague answer: "Normal field adjustment, sir, within tolerance." Carter didn't buy it. He started watching the maintenance crews at night. The hangars glowed under dim yellow bulbs, filled with the smell of hydraulic oil and warm metal. And there he saw it: Sergeant Daniel Foster, crouched under another P-38, flashlight clamped between his teeth. Working deep inside the left boom, Foster's hands were moving fast, too precise to be routine maintenance. Carter approached, asked what he was doing. Foster froze. He could have lied, said he was checking pulleys or lubricating linkages. But something in him snapped. He'd seen too many kids die because of rules written 7,000 miles away. He told Carter the truth, every word: the piano wire, the slack, the deaths, and how a 6-inch piece of salvage steel had changed everything. Carter didn't say a word for a long time. Then he simply told Foster, "You know this is a court-martial offense." Foster nodded. "Yes, sir. But it's saving lives." Carter walked away without replying. 2 days later, a report appeared on the desk of Colonel William Travers, head of aircraft maintenance for the 5th Air Force. The file was thin, just 3 pages, but its contents could shake the system. Travers read about unauthorized modifications to primary flight control systems using non-standard materials. The report mentioned statistically significant improvements in aircraft roll response and unexplained increases in pilot survival rate. The colonel didn't know whether to be furious or impressed. He'd been in the Air Corps since the 1930s. He'd seen every kind of mechanical failure imaginable: fuel leaks, cracked spars, jammed flaps. But he'd never seen enlisted mechanics quietly alter factory designs and then outperform the engineers who built them. Travers summoned Foster to his tent the next morning. Foster stood stiff as a post, hands trembling slightly from exhaustion and fear. He expected charges: dereliction of duty, unauthorized modification, insubordination. Instead, Travers poured him a cup of coffee, then said something Foster never forgot. Son, you broke every damn rule in the book, but I've buried too many men this year to punish you for saving some.
Travers asked him to show exactly what he did.
Foster took a piece of piano wire from his toolkit and bent it into that same Z shape, explaining how it added preload tension, how it killed the control lag without overstressing the cable. Travers watched, silent, calculating, then told him, "From this point forward, you will not speak of this to anyone outside my command. I'll take it from here." A week later, a Lockheed field representative landed at Doadura. Word had traveled across the Pacific faster than any airplane could fly. The company wanted answers. The rep, a civilian engineer named Howard McKinnon, was escorted straight to the maintenance area. He inspected 3 modified aircraft, crawled under the wings, and looked inside the booms. When he found the Z-shaped wire, he laughed softly. It was the kind of laugh only an engineer gives when he realizes he's been beaten by a field mechanic. "Simple," McKinnon said. "Elegant. Dangerous as hell if done wrong, but brilliant." He spent 2 days running tests, measured cable loads, stick pressures, response times. What he found confirmed everything Foster had claimed. The P-38's roll lag vanished. Control response improved by nearly 15%. The pilots weren't imagining it. McKinnon filed his report to Lockheed's engineering division in California. The document described an unauthorized but effective field adaptation and recommended integrating a permanent solution into future P-38 production models. Back at Doadura, nobody mentioned Foster by name. Officially, the improvement was an internal engineering refinement. Unofficially, everyone in the 475th Fighter Group knew who deserved the credit. By November 1943, kill ratios told the real story. Before the modification, P-38s were losing 2 aircraft for every 0 destroyed. Now, the number had flipped, 1.2 to 1, and improving every week. Pilots were coming back with stories of Japanese fighters that couldn't outroll them anymore. Lieutenant Alex Stone shot down his 9th aircraft that month. He told Foster afterward, "It's not just faster. It feels alive, like it finally trusts me." And yet, even as victories mounted, nobody outside the squadron knew the truth. The report sent to Washington credited pilot experience, tactical refinement, and combat adaptation. Not a word about a mechanic in New Guinea, or the piano wire that rewrote the P-38's fate. In Tokyo, Japanese Air Command began issuing new orders. Engagement with P-38 aircraft is to be avoided unless numerical advantage is assured. That line marked the end of an era. The Zero, once the undisputed master of Pacific skies, had lost its edge. Its myth of invincibility shattered not by a new weapon, not by an advanced engine, but by a 6-inch piece of scavenged piano wire and a mechanic's defiance. Foster didn't feel like a hero. He just felt tired. Tired of watching young men die for specifications. Tired of carrying secrets that nobody would ever believe. And most of all, tired of the silence that followed every mission's end. The war rolled on. By the spring of 1944, the jungles of New Guinea had turned into muddy, rust-colored graveyards of wrecked aircraft, American and Japanese alike. But in the air, everything had changed. The P-38 Lightning, once dismissed as a heavy, sluggish twin-engine brute, was now feared. It no longer ran from a fight. It owned it, and every pilot who climbed into one knew that somewhere, deep in the guts of that machine, was a secret they couldn't talk about, a tiny hidden wire that made the difference between victory and death. When Lockheed's engineers in California received McKinnon's report, they didn't quite know what to make of it. The fix was too simple.
It didn't require new alloys or complex hydraulics, just a mechanical preload that could have been designed into the
airplane from the start. They called it progressive control tensioning.
By the time the P-38J rolled off the assembly line in late 1943, it came standard with a new system that kept constant cable tension through all flight regimes. But the official paperwork credited ongoing field analysis by Lockheed engineering staff. Nowhere, not in the memos, not in the test results, not in the patents, was there any mention of a 23-year-old farm kid from Iowa or a grease-covered mechanic from Long Beach who defied the rules to make it happen. To the world, it was just another quiet improvement in the endless march of wartime innovation. But to the men who flew those planes, it was personal. Lieutenant Alex Stone flew 63 combat missions before the end of the war. He racked up 11 confirmed kills, including 2 over the Philippines in early 1945. He made it home alive. He got married, had 2 children, and spent the rest of his life farming the same Iowa soil he grew up on. Every year on August 17th, he called one man, not his commander, not a superior officer, but the mechanic who had saved his life, Technical Sergeant Daniel Foster. Their conversations were short but heavy with meaning. Stone would simply say, "Danny, I'm still here," and Foster would always reply, "That's all that matters." They never talked about the piano wire again. Not once, not even after the war. Some stories didn't need to be told because both men already knew. When Foster returned home to Long Beach in 1946, he went back to fixing cars. His hands were steady, his eyes sharp. Neighbors said he could tell what was wrong with an engine just by the sound it made. He never mentioned the war, never mentioned the aircraft he had changed, never mentioned how a single act of defiance had shifted the balance of the Pacific skies. His discharge papers listed him as an aircraft maintenance specialist, U.S. Army Air Forces. That was it. No commendation, no citation, no note of what he'd done. But every few years, a letter would arrive, handwritten, from an old pilot. Sometimes from the 475th Fighter Group, sometimes from a squadron he'd never even heard of. Each one said a version of the same thing. "I flew a Lightning that rolled faster than it should have, and I came home because of it. Thank you." Foster kept them all in a cigar box under his workbench, never showed them to anyone. In 1957, a Lockheed internal review for the company's 25th anniversary mentioned an ingenious field modification discovered in the Pacific Theater, later integrated into P-38J production. The author had no idea who made it. To them, it was a footnote, a curiosity of wartime improvisation. But that footnote represented hundreds of lives saved. Dozens of pilots who made it back from missions that would have killed them just months before. Each one owed their survival to a mechanic who refused to accept factory tolerances as a death sentence. The military never officially recognized Foster. No medal, no commendation, because officially what he did never happened. But among the men who flew those planes, his name became something else. A quiet legend. You could hear it whispered in hangars, in veterans' reunions, in stories passed down to new mechanics. If your controls feel off, remember what Foster did in '43. Every generation of aircraft after the P-38 carried a lesson born from that moment. The P-51 Mustang, the F-86 Sabre, even the modern jets that would one day break the sound barrier. All of them included adjustable tension systems for control cables. Every one of those systems traced its roots back to a forgotten night in a humid hangar in New Guinea, where a man with a flashlight and a piece of piano wire refused to give up. And that's how history works, not through speeches or medals, but through the hands of people who refuse to accept good enough.
through quiet defiance, through small changes that ripple across decades. Today, the hangar at Doadura is gone. The jungle reclaimed it long ago. But in a small garage in Long Beach, California, where Daniel Foster spent the rest of his life fixing engines, a photograph still hangs on the back wall. It shows a young man in coveralls standing next to a P-38 Lightning. The metal behind him gleams under the tropical sun. The date scrawled on the back reads, August 1943, New Guinea. Most people who see that photo don't know what it means. But if you look close, if you know the story, you can almost hear it. The faint metallic twang of a tensioned cable. The echo of an engine that rolled faster than it ever should have. The sound of a war quietly turning in favor of those who dared to think differently. In every war, not all heroes wear medals. Some leave behind only whispers, and the legacy of a single, brilliant idea. If you were moved by this story, don't let it end here. Hit subscribe and join us as we uncover more untold moments that changed the course of World War II, one forgotten hero at a time. And before you go, keep watching. Your next journey through history is right here on screen. Discover the hidden battles, secret inventions, and human stories that shaped the world we live in today.